Okay, great. So we're going to get started. Welcome, everyone, to our special lecture event this evening. Aspetuck Land Trust is proud to present Edwina von Gaal's live Zoom lecture, The Future Perfect, creating healthy, toxin-free landscapes for your family, pets, and the planet. My name is Jean Stets-Pachowski, and I'll be our host for this evening's program. So before we get started, I just wanted to review a few quick details about the Zoom program and how we'll be collecting questions for the speaker. So you'll notice for those familiar with Zoom, you know all about the chat and the Q&A controls at the bottom of your screen. For those who are new to Zoom, you can go to the bottom of the screen and you'll see something called chat. What we'd like you to do is if you have questions for our speaker, our lecturer, Edwina, or for Mel this evening, please enter your questions right into the chat, and we will be getting to a Q&A at the end of the lecture. So that's what and how we're going to go about doing things. And so I'd like to introduce Mary Ellen LeMay, the Director of Landowner Engagement at Aspetuck Land Trust, who's responsible for land stewardship and outreach to our Aspetuck members and the community at large, and who's responsible for curating this incredible lecture today. So Mel, on to you.
Okay, thank you, Jean. Welcome everybody. This has been quite an amazing response to this lecture, which I knew was going to happen. And we're very excited to have Edwina von Gaal here tonight. And I wanted to start by first thanking Jean Stets-Pachowski, who is our host for this evening. She is her Zoom expertise is always a benefit to us at Aspetuck Land Trust. Jean is the principal of Individual Differences at Work Leadership and Coaching. She cultivates leaders who grow organizations. And Jean is a longtime member and supporter of Aspetuck Land Trust. So I am so thankful, Jean, for you to be here tonight and to manage this Zoom for us. And before we start, I'd also like to send a shout out of thank you to our sponsors for tonight, Dan Delventhal from Mo Green, Organic and Quiet Electric Lawn Care. And I thought that Mo Green was a perfect sponsor for this evening's talk on transforming what we do to our yards and our lawns. Dan's company, Mo Green, uses only gasoline and emission-free super quiet equipment. So it's gasoline free and emission free. And he offers organic land care consultants. So thank you, Mo Green and Dan, for your sponsorship of Edwina's lecture this evening. So before I introduce our wonderful speaker, I wanted to give you a brief overview of the Aspetuck Land Trust, because I'm sure a lot of you on tonight are members, and there are probably just as many folks who this is their first time at one of our Aspetuck Land Trust lectures. The Aspetuck Land Trust was created in 1966 and has grown to over 1,800 members. And we protect over 2,000 acres of open space in our towns of Westport, Weston, Easton, and Fairfield, as well as some properties in Wilton and Bridgeport. With 150 nature preserves, we are doing the best to protect as much land as possible. However, we can't save it all. In our 40,000 acre green corridor, only 33% of the land is actually protected. The rest is privately owned. Our neighborhoods, our yards, act as the connective tissue in between our protected lands. So that's why what we do in our yards is so important, and small changes can make a big difference in biodiversity in our region. Tonight, Edwina will share with us her success that she has had encouraging toxin-free yards and sustainable design. And to launch her lecture, I'd like to share this really short 3-minute video clip about the Aspetuck Green Corridor and the action steps that we can take and why we should work together to do this. Thank you to Melissa Newman and her beautiful voice narrating this video, and to Red Shoe Films and Jeremy Dreyfus for volunteering their time to produce it. So if you bear with me for a second, I shall start the video. Full screen, we're still sharing, okay. And
So as Mel is stopping her screen share and then finding her video to put up for us today, we're just so thrilled, Edwina, to have you here today. We're so excited. And Mel, thank you so much for your leadership with the Green Corridor and really engaging those of us who are longtime members and all of our new friends who are joining us today.
all right, thank you. So Jean, do you see the full screen?
So what you'll do is at the top of the screen, hit screen
Oh,
share. Yep.
there you go.
And
All
there
right,
we go. Here we are.
let's go. There you go.
Imagine a Fairfield County where the beauty of our land is preserved, where birds and insects flourish and natural species thrive, where people have more preserved lands to enjoy, drinking water is pure, and flooding is diminished. Here at Aspetuck Land Trust, we are making this happen and encouraging others to support our Green Corridor mission. Part 1 of the Green Corridor is protecting land. We are preserving strategically located land parcels in our 6-town region by either purchasing them or receiving them as donations. So far, this includes 42 parcels and over 800 acres of land. Among those are Gilberti's Farm and the Fromson Strassler property in Weston, where we are creating a 705-acre forest block on the Weston-Wilton border. Part 2 of the Green Corridor is land stewardship, encouraging homeowners to keep their backyards sustainable.
We are controlling the plants that are on our land. And right now we vastly favor giant lawns. We've got 40 million acres of lawn in this country. That's the size of New England. And particularly the way we treat our lawns, it's a deadscape. Our lawns don't provide food webs that support all the other things that we need. So what we want to do is re-landscape our yards. I suggest we cut the area of lawn in half, put in the plants that support the food webs and the pollinators, and create what we call biological corridors that connect the actual habitats so that the plants and animals in those habitats not only can move back and forth between habitats, but they can actually live outside those habitats. The Green Corridor Initiative from Aspetuck Land Trust is organizing an effort to create the biological corridors that we talked about. Of course, the corridor will be much more effective if everybody joins up. If you have holes in it, that's an obstruction. And it's not hard. Put that oak tree in your yard and instead of the ginkgo, and all of a sudden you've got connectivity with migrating birds and countless other species.
We are in a critical moment in time to save our species and protect our natural lands. Insect populations have declined by 40% since the 1970s, and we've lost 3 billion birds since that time. And as population growth swells in America's suburbs, so does harmful development. Creating a greener planet starts with greener suburbs and greener backyards.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for listening to that wonderful video. I can't seem to watch it enough. I just think it's just great. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to let Edwina to begin to get her presentation together. And I wanted to just talk while she's getting ready, encouraging people to become Green Corridor partners. We are actually inspiring people to take a pledge and do 3 things in their yard. 1, plant natives, avoid pesticides is number 2, and number 3, make your lawn sustainable. So tonight we want to kick off 2021 with Edwina focusing on number 2 and number 3, which is avoid pesticides and make your lawn sustainable. And concentrate on creating toxin-free yards. So as principal of Edwina Von Gaal and Company Landscape Design since 1984, Edwina began a second career as an environmental activist in 2004 in Panama, reforesting with native trees, and then founded the Perfect Earth Project in 2013 to promote toxin-free, nature-based landscape practices. In 2020, the Perfect Earth Project has launched an initiative called 2/3 for the Birds to inspire all those in the landscape and environmental fields and homeowners to make every landscape bird habitat friendly. We at Aspetuck Land Trust are very excited about this new bird initiative because it's the perfect next step for people who have made their properties pollinator friendly. And now we think that people are ready to take the next step up the food chain and beyond pollinators and onto the birds. So without further ado, I'm very proud to introduce our speaker tonight, and Edwina van Gaal.
Thank you. Is that working?
Yes, it is.
Great. Thank you so much, Mel and Jean. And thank you everybody who bought books. My gosh, it's fantastic. The books have been flying out. I'm assuming it's your audience. And how terrific that you have Mo Green tonight. And I hope that Dan will chime in and correct me, because I depend on people who are out in the field to keep me accurate, because it's an interesting and changing field. We're learning as we go for a lot of this. So this is, let's see, this is where I live, on the east end of Long Island. And this is my inspiration. And it's a landscape that I'm not allowed to touch, which makes it stress-free for me. But also, because my landscapes are nature-based, it's something I can learn from just all the time and year round. But what has happened in our neighborhoods is this, which is toxic blue-green algae. And it started about 10 years ago. And this is some of the most expensive real estate on Earth around Georgia Pond. And so it did get people's attention, but it also got mine, because it's like, what's happening here? This is Lake Agawam in Southampton, right in the middle of town, houses all around, landscapes all around. And then this happened. I got a grandson. And so I started thinking, okay, what's my role in this? How does my work as a landscape designer and my entire profession, what are we doing, and how can we contribute to healing this problem? And I asked my clients what they do when I'm not around. You know, I do the designs and then leave the maintenance pretty much to others. And so we looked at their contracts, and we found out that they were actually using a lot of chemicals because nobody had really asked. And I came to find that landscape chemicals are, people use 2 to 4 times more on residential ornamental landscapes than they do on agriculture, because we're not eating it. So the regulations are different, and more is more, and away you go. And it's a business model. So it's been, and I also found out just exactly how remarkably harmful they are in terms of the number of diseases they cause and what they do to our water and our soil. And more of that is now coming out with the Roundup stories and everything. So I thought, okay, what happens if you just stop using them? What if you don't use synthetic chemicals? Is the industry told me everything, my life, everything would fall apart. My jobs would fall apart, things would die, everything, and my clients would all fire me. But happily, I had a few clients that said, we'll stick with you, let's give this a try. And actually, nothing terrible happened, and we learned so much. And so I thought, okay, I've got the confidence to do this, and I started the Perfect Earth Project. And so I also learned about, like, well, how did we get here? Because it's always really, if you're going to fix something, you kind of got to understand what it is. And it all started pretty innocently, really. After the war, we were using chemicals that were war surplus in many cases, and nobody thought they were bad. They thought this is the future. This is really good. And people came home and they started their suburban lives with with the GI Bill and Levittown, and the whole thing was sort of like this sense of security with people who were traumatized by the war, that anything that looked sort of military was probably more comforting. And so the new enemy now was dandelions. because they were a really easy target in that they're super easy to see. So like a block away, you'd know if your neighbor is not in line with the program. And the program really was to use chemicals because once you started with a broadleaf killer, it killed everything but the grass. And so that meant also clover, which is beneficial, and dandelions and everything. So, but it allowed for the grass to take over, and it sold a lot of grass seed, and it sold a lot of broadleaf killer. And people no longer thought of doing this. You know, this is over, and this is in. And these are this is a modern landscape, and it consists largely of plants that are sold as nothing will eat them. So that seemed like a good idea, just like also innocently. But then when you realize, well, wait a minute, we have agriculture, that's food for humans. But what about all the other life on Earth? What are they going to eat? And if we only have plants out there that nothing will eat, then we're in a little bit of trouble. And if the lawns, and on top of it all, you know, to add insult to injury, we're treating it with deadly poisons. This is the new food desert of our home landscapes. And this is the look of our landscape industry. Basically, it's all about killing and controlling. And there's just nothing here about life. There's nothing about fostering life. So most of our landscapes are kept sort of on life support or death support. They're just kept barely alive with constant infusions of chemicals, but not as healthy plants. And the other thing that we've lost we're losing is our own gut biome. As the soil biome is destroyed, our gut biome is destroyed, because when they develop these new chemicals that are more sophisticated than DDT, people said, well, they're not going to hurt us. Like they used to say you could drink Roundup. But your gut biome is actually made up of all the things that pesticides kill. It's made up of bacteria and fungi and little insects. And they outnumber your own body cells by 10 to 1. And we're learning just every day about how important the gut biome is, not only as originally was thought to just the gut and digestive systems, but now they know that they really control our immune systems and our nervous systems and our endocrine systems. Just they're critical. And so chemicals are going to have a seriously negative effect on them if you're exposed. And so we have gotten smart about what we eat. People are eating kale, and they're eating organic kale, and everybody's growing organic vegetables, but they're walking across the toxic landscape to get to their organic vegetables. And those toxins stick to your body, and you take them back in the house. And once they're out of the sun, they can last for a couple of years in your house. And then you constantly bring more in. They're in your laundry, they're on your couch, they're in your rug, and they just never go away. So what's the answer? How do we deal with that? And so my job and my next thing was to figure, okay, well, what do we do? And you've heard this probably, excuse me, many times, which is feed the soil, not the plants. That's the bottom line of nature-based care. But what does it actually mean? And what it actually means is that the soil is the source of life for plants. And how do you do that? Well, in the small landscape, it's actually kind of the less you do, in a way, the better, which is stop treating your lawn. Fungicides are just the worst, because you're talking most of it's all the mycorrhiza, that whole network. That's fungus, that's fungi, you know. So as soon as you use a fungicide on your lawn, you're killing the essential ingredient of plant health throughout your property. You're killing your soil. So the first thing towards nature-based land care is just kind of stop. My feeling is, if it comes in a bottle, if it comes in a package, chances are I can't ever figure out a reason why you need it, because each place contains all that it needs for health, because that's the way it evolved and that's the way it's always been. So what it means is don't do this. This is leaves being blown off the soil. So the soil is exposed to freeze thaw. It's going to be dried out on cold, sunny days and then frozen. Then the drip tubes we'll get to, that's like not so great. But even all the insects that we're hoping to overwinter in those leaves that have blown off to the right of the screen, they're toast, you know, that is not going to work. And the roots of the plants that are now in that soil just below the surface are also going to be severely damaged. And so this plant is going to come into the next season at a disadvantage. The biggest thing that people do wrong, which would seem like absolutely the easiest, is watering. And you've got to water as seldom as possible and as deep as possible, because that's where the roots want to be. They want to be down where it's dark and cool. And if you just water a little bit all the time, they're going to be on the surface, and then that dries out really fast, and then they need more. And they're susceptible to grubs and all kinds of diseases, and they never dry out because you have to keep them wet. And then they get fungus diseases. So it's sort of an endless cycle of problems. And but people's irrigation guy will set the system sometime in the spring when they shouldn't be watering, and they leave for the rest of the season. And that's kind of it. And that's just not the way nature works. So I'm going to zoom through this and leave as much time as possible for questions so that I can know what you really want to hear about all of this. So obviously what Doug Tallamy is saying, and I'm riding on Doug's coattails often here, which is that I'm sort of the how-to and he's the why-to, but any parts of your lawn that you're not using, why not put in some native plants? Because they evolved here, they're easy to care for, and they're going to provide ecosystem services, and they don't need you. So it's no mowing. They say that lawn is the least expensive plant to plant and the most expensive to maintain long term. So, because it's just this constant thing. That's what people are always, well, the lawn. And it's like, oh, well, what if we just sort of stop with that? Because if you're not using it, why do you have it? Why not have something that's more interested and use native plants? So this is a perfect opportunity to change your plant palette. And there are lots of ways that you can reduce your lawn, like just let it go and then put one little bit of mowing area in so that it looks like you meant it. And doing that also can showcase plants that are native, maybe not your idea of the most exciting ornamental, but actually when you give them a special place, they start to look pretty amazing. This is a native black cherry, and they're really beautiful. These have grown quite a bit since I created this, and they're just endlessly fascinating. Or you can have no lawn at all. I mean, how many people actually use their front yard? And I know people talk about creating vegetable gardens in their front yards. That's great. But what about something that feeds insects and pollinators and requires extraordinarily little care? Or you can let a lawn go. This is the lawn I made from all the weeds of the east end of Long Island, all the things that people are trying to kill. And I just doubled them up. And the other thing is, like, if you can't go for the full-on flowering lawn, just at least allow the clover to happen. Clover was always considered fabulous until 2,4-D and atrazine came along, the broadleaf killers, and they were trying to get rid of dandelions or other like noxious weeds. And when they found out it killed clover, they stopped including clover, which was a typical ingredient of lawn seed in the past, because it so helps lawn to be healthy. But so this anti-clover campaign was extremely successful. So people now think of clover as bad. It grows faster than lawn in the spring, so it bumps up. So you don't get that military cut because it sort of mounds and to my mind, what's wrong with that? It looks alive. And so one of the big things with mowing also is to mow it high, mow to 4, cut to 3 inches. A longer leaf blade, more photosynthesis, healthier roots, and it shades out and outcompetes weeds. Obviously, if your mower blades are sharp, you're not tearing them and wounding the blades. The other very big thing is leaving your grass clippings. If you're continually extracting what the grass plant made for itself, you're going to have to feed it because you just keep taking it away. But if you mulch mow, and that's key, you got to use mulch mowers to chop it up really fine and it drives it back into the soil. That stuff disappears within half a day to a day, so that you could just clear away the areas where you walk, but you got to leave your clippings. And also the amount of reduction on our landfill is massive. Grass clippings produce methane, which is way more intense a greenhouse gas than carbon. So you're doing a good thing on so many levels. Plus, you're not using the fossil fuels to cart it to the dump. I mean, this is a picture of just sad waste to me, that they're taking these clippings away. And leaving the leaves is another story. I'm sure everybody's heard about that. And the mulch mowers are really key to the success of these projects. One big key too is make sure your mowing is coordinated with your watering, because if your irrigation system is set to come on the day you mow, then you're going to have big, saggy, nasty clumps of grass, and it doesn't even cut very well either. And generally, there's no conversation between irrigation and lawn mowing, and that is a really important conversation. And a personal goal that I set for my property and most of the properties I work on is that no biomass leaves the property. It's not always easy, and because you got to find ways to do places to put everything. But here's an example. There's Homage Monet, a haystack made from cutting the meadow. There is a log wall made from all the dead trees that were swamped by vines when this area was cleared, or some of them are also invasive trees like Norway maples. And then ultimately that melts into the ground and gets replaced by a real hedge. There are so many ways that you can use biomass, and of course this is a habitat pile. Just all the little twigs you find, you just keep stacking them up and they kind of disappear and rot down as you do it. But this is home for thrushes. And bark chips make great paths in the areas where it's too shady. Just chip up your extra stuff and put it on the ground. But then the other thing to do is compost it. And you might not have a place in your property that you would like to have look like this. But so, you know, there are lots of options. I mean, the green Johanna, this doesn't look particularly exciting, but you can put one of these anywhere, and they take meat, fish, and dairy can go in these things. They're pretty darn remarkable. Or you can get really serious about your composting and start flipping your piles and make it neat. But in whatever you do, you can produce all the compost, all the mulch, everything you need, because it's the food your property made for itself. And so it's perfectly balanced. And then if you have lots of mulch that you're producing, please don't do this. This is a new look in landscaping, which the landscapers have told me they do because their clients like it, but their clients like it because they do it. So it's sort of this crazy cycle. People think, oh, my landscaper's doing a good job because I came home and I saw these mountains all around. They look like toilet plungers. And that is so bad for trees. They can't breathe. And so ultimately, it takes a few years, the trees start putting adventitious roots out into this mass, but ultimately the tree will be seriously compromised. It takes a long time, but it is not good for trees. The other mystery to me is that people put heavy mulch between plants. Mulch is a growth inhibitor. So that means those plants are going to have a really hard time ever getting together. Plants are social. they want to be touching, they want to be all growing together. Natural systems don't leave big open patches. And it's just like your corridor, you know, there's a there's a real break in this corridor right through the middle of this plant bed, and tiny insects are not going to cross it. So instead of buying mulch, just buy more plants. Just get plugs, fill the beds. This is a natural system. There is no soil, there is no mulch. It's solid plants. And then you can turn it into a garden. And this is my version of a happy natural system for bees. But, you know, this is the exact, you know, over the top other direction, but there's no soil. There is no mulching in this garden necessary, because it is all plants. And we're not too fussy about what comes up where. You just get a great group of plants together and let them go for it. And here's a more modest version of the same thing, and it's designing for habitat. So habitat is food, shelter, and water. This is food and shelter right here, because this Vernonia, the ironweed, it blooms all summer. The bees absolutely love it. It's native. It's called New York ironweed. I don't know why it's not called Connecticut, but we got it. And there are insects all over it all summer, and then all winter it has seed heads, which the birds visit, and the insects in the spring, when you cut it down, live in the stems. And so it's just a really fantastic year-round plant. And so it's providing food, and shelter consists of places for birds and insects to hide from predators, but also a place for them to raise their young or lay their eggs. And these plants provide all of that. The other thing, water. If you can do it, put in a pond, put in a water feature. This is what I did, and this is just really not long after we installed it. So there's still some blank spaces, but they grow in so fast, and instantly there's dragonflies and birds, and it's actually a super, once you get, recover from the cost of putting one in, the maintenance is absolutely dead simple. And they're just an endless joy. But if you don't have space or resources for a pond, put in a bird bath. I've since added a drip to this bird bath so that it constantly it attracts a lot more birds, and it stays cleaner, and there's never mosquitoes. And you just never know who's going to show up. And the bird baths are just like endlessly fascinating. The other thing I like to make is what I call bee beaches. Bees, as you know, have tiny little legs, and they don't swim, and they need a lot of water to make honey. And so they need to be able to just walk up to the water in a very shallow way. So this drips, this hose bib just this constant little drip, and so that it keeps itself flushed of mosquito larvae, and the bees just love it. And here's another bee beach with that is also watering a dog. And so in terms of your biomass and habitat, a combination of the two is dead wood. Dead wood to me it's micro endangered habitats. Everybody now is so darn tidy. Your landscape is not your living room. Your landscape is nature's living room, and nature needs dead wood. Nature needs leaves on the ground. Nature needs to grow things in the direction it wants to grow things. And so a standing dead tree still has quite a few years of life left in it. Places for birds, places for bugs. Dead wood and trees provides habitat for kinds of insects that don't live anywhere else. And those are insects that serve specific kinds of birds. So, and I think dead trees they're called snags. They're really beautiful. As long as it's not over your house or your car, you really don't have to worry about it. And when they fall down, amazing things happen, and they just melt into the soil. And then who knows, a stinking horn might just come up. And on the basis of this idea that everything else is the food for everything else, nibbling is normal. You've got to give up. The trees are the salad bar for insects. So you got to give something up. You got to let them eat. This is not going to harm your tree. It is the business of the spray companies to tell you you need to spray when something's eating your leaves. I would say 99% of the time, you do not need to spray. I don't even know a time when you do. Doug Talmy convinced me to leave the tent caterpillars that one year were really intensive on my wild cherries. Like they completely defoliated a few of them. And he said, just leave them. And I thought, this is never going to work. And actually, the trees completely leafed out. I got a pair of yellow-billed cuckoos, and the tent caterpillar population declined dramatically. But until you build a population of the predators, you're not going to build a population of the predators of the predators. And a tree can lose 10 to 20% of its leaf mass every year on a regular basis. It was intended for that. And by midsummer, it can lose all its leaves because the leaves job is done. This will not affect the health of the tree. If it is completely defoliated more than 1 year in a row, that is going to be a problem for the tree. But unless it's a really strange infestation of some exotic insect, it's not likely to happen. And here's the benefactor, or the beneficent, what is it? Anyway, the one who benefits is robins. And you know from Doug's talk, Shirley, that chickadees need 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars to raise a single nest of young, and they need to raise 2 or 3 in a season. So, you know, you've got to have caterpillars, you've got to have bugs, and you got to kind of know your bugs. If you don't know what this is and you think it looks like it really ought to be dead before it does something terrible to your plants, it would be good for you to know that this is a very hungry teenager and it wants to eat aphids before it grows into this adult. And so people just say, why we think that ladybugs are adorable and their larval forms are scary, I'm not quite sure. But once you know that's the larval form, you'll probably find it really cute too. And so designing your landscapes to serve insects and designing for independence, because the more you build a landscape that relies on you, the less fun it's going to be. You can never stop and, you know, see the birds and watch the bugs because you're always worried about this out of place, that needs pruning, this needs care. The more you can design with nature in mind and let nature make decisions and let things mature to their natural shape and natural habit and fill in nicely and not need it, the more it is. And it doesn't have to look like a wild mess. This house has 0 lawn. Every plant on the plant palette was taken from the surrounding area that I just took the inspiration from there. Excuse me. And so the plants are native to the space. I mean, from within like 2 miles. And so they're happy there. And this was fairly not long after this project got built. And we just floated these walkways over the landscape. And so the landscape is just moving in on its own. And there's very, very little work that needs to be done. Or, you know, most Roundup use in the residential landscape is for driveways. So what if you sort of didn't care? What if you let your driveway just be determined by your tires? And designing for resilience is the next step up, because in the face of climate change, we are going to be looking at weather events that will put a lot of extra stress on our gardens. And so by having this a buffer that is resilient, that is native plants, that this foreground property is obviously going to hold up better when a storm hits it, and it's obviously going to help buffer and filter whatever is happening upland in terms of stormwater, chemicals, erosion, and protect the water clarity as well. And this another kind of buffer zone, just how you can transition from upland to water in a way that looks that is natural and pleasing. And so this meadow goes down to the water, and it's just all year round a delight. And all it needs is to be mowed once a year. And because in the wintertime, people don't always think of how beautiful plants can be in the winter. And there's this new rage for wrapping everything in burlap, which is so sad for me, because why not have plants that look spectacular? And then in the spring, we experimented. This is taking mow green a little bit farther and scything. So talk about silent. The whoosh of a scythe is absolutely the most poetic and magical thing. And you get this incredible windrows of stuff. I'm not saying it's for everybody, but it's worth the consideration. The other thing that it does is it cuts a meadow without harming any of the resident wildlife. And it cuts it high enough that native bees still have lots of places to live. And so then you can make yourself a Romanian haystack, and you haven't killed the turtles that were there when we were done, still there. And so what's really great news is that more and more places are planting this way. This is Brooklyn Bridge Park. So here is a native planting right in the middle of Brooklyn, which people really love. And this is sending this just terrific message that this is good. This is not a mess. This is not a batch of weeds. This is something beautiful, and it's filled with life. And people are starting to recognize this as garden. And this, you can make really fabulous gardens. This is, these are pitcher plants that we stuck in a pond, in a bog that we've designed. And, it's totally carefree. It's taking care of itself entirely. And one of my favorite things to do is go out into nature and see some place where nature's done it better than I can. And just by itself, nobody's taking care of this. It's doing it itself. And I call it copy that. So I take a picture of it, or like this. And then when I have a landscape to design that has these conditions, I already know what I'm going to do. And it's going to thrive. And it's not going to need any chemicals because it's not getting them out in nature. And whenever possible, just figuring out a way to let go. Just what's there, let it happen. Meadows are really wonderful once you get the balance right. They move, they change every year. If you get the right plants and you can keep the invasives out, big challenge sometimes, but once it's all balanced, it all comes together, and you just cut it once a year. And things like mullein, and now everybody's mad for milkweed, which used to be considered the worst weed. And actually it's kind of hard to get established, and mulleins too. But once they start seeding around, they make such wonderful surprises because they just come up where they want to. And last year I got a morel. That was like the ultimate. And when I found a morel. And this I found on on a client's property when we stopped mowing. And we did have to get the deer out to do this, but you can't plant a lady slipper. So it's all about making a commitment. Promise yourself you will not use chemicals. Promise yourself that you will plant 2 natives for every 3 plants you put in your yard, and that you'll get rid of all the invasives. And if you cheat, the only person who loses really is you and the planet ultimately. But if you've made the commitment and you don't keep the commitment, that's kind of like getting married and cheating. And you can get away with cheating, but it's really not the same relationship. And so what we're asking everybody to do is just make this commitment, and then try to infuse everyone in the landscape industry and in your community, and you're already in the midst of a fabulous community of this, to think the same way. And so this is my new initiative, 2/3 for the birds. And so that's what we're asking people to do. And it's based on Doug Tallamy's research, which said that 70% of a bird's native range must be native plants for that bird population to survive. So I converted that to 2/3 and made it rhyme. And so I am asking every board of directors, every staff, and every membership of every environmental organization to just make that really, really simple commitment, because now we have a measurable goal that we can establish. If I just get my landscape up to 2/3 native, I will have turned the corner on the bird decline. And that course, involves insects and everything else in the wild, and your water quality and everything. But we know now, because Doug actually counted it all, that that's what you need to do to make this difference. And if it doesn't matter how small your yard is, because if your yard is functioning and it's connected to the yard next to you, there's your corridor, and that's your green corridor, and that's what you're doing. And it's really not all that simple. I mean, all that difficult. It's very simple, and it's free. And so contact us, sign up for our newsletters. You can, if you go to 234birds.org, you can sign up and make your commitment there. There's a lot of information in addition about native plants and where to get, well, not so much where to get them as what they are, how to identify them, and how to create habitat, and all the other people who are doing it, and what's happening throughout the world of native plants. And then Perfect Earth tells you how. Thank you.
Well, Edwina, we have some remarkable questions for you today.
Good.
So, shall we dig in?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay, so let's get started. Let me pop up to our top. So you mentioned something about toxins used in landscape that change the gut biome. There's a question about evidence. What evidence is there linking toxins used in the landscape to change in the gut biome?
Well, there's papers done by a guy out, I'm just blanking on his name, Trevor Tyrone Banks, I think is his name, who did a lot of work on atrazine and frogs and the effect on their endocrine system. So that's not so much gut biome, but there's a guy, Dr. Zach Bush, who has done a tremendous amount of work on the effects, particularly of Roundup, on the gut biome. He has a website. You can look at his research there. And now, of course, we know, and he's looking at both the gut biome and the immune system and the effects of Roundup. There is not enough research, but to my mind, we know that your gut biome exists, and we know that what the gut biome consists of, and we know what chemicals do. There is a tremendous amount of research now that's available. Mount Sinai has a lot. If you go to Mount Sinai, that's probably the single best. They have a research center for the effects of environmental chemicals, especially on children. Children are very highly susceptible because their systems are in formation. And so when they're exposed, there is more and more research available. And it sort of falls to reason. And my feeling is, even if I'm not sure, why would I take a chance? If I have an opportunity to have an amazing landscape filled with life and insects, and why would I choose one that's dead and possibly dangerous for me? The one thing we know is without chemicals, you're not affecting your gut biome except positively.
Edwina, thank you so much. And so a follow-up statement, you mentioned something about making the connection between walking through a treated chemical landscape and then bringing some of that into the house. And so someone was making a comment, just wondering, is it a good practice to take off shoes when entering the house to keep toxins out?
It is. It's a really good idea, because even if you've been to the park or you've been across the neighbor's lawn or any place like that, the most chemicals, landscape chemicals, do break down pretty quickly in sunlight. And that's why the signs on your lawn say, don't come here for 24 hours or 48 hours or whatever the requirement is for that particular application. But nobody really knows. and I mean, it's based on some science, but it's not, what if it's in the shade, or what if they applied it extra heavy, or all sorts of things. So yeah, take off your shoes. It's a good idea.
It's just a wonderful connection that we wouldn't have thought to make. And so Mel, I believe this is a question for you. Will Haskins have a clover lawn?
That is a great question. Let me see if I can put my video. Yes, it will. We actually have a bee lawn, pollinator lawn, a meadow, and we're actually going to do what we call a lawn that has clover islands. So the whole lawn's not going to be clover, but we're going to mow around islands of clover. And I actually saw that at a dear friend of mine's house in Old Lyme, Connecticut. And I thought it looked amazing. So we're going to do that at Haskins. So, you know, and some people say, well, clover's not native, but it is a major pollinator plant, and it's certainly better than lawn. And it provides a lot of the nutrients that our pollinators need. And, you know, we've got plenty of photographs actually of some very endangered bees who are feeding on clover. So yes, we will have clover at Haskins of many different colors.
That's wonderful. Maybe if you can get a few violets in there, then you will have a native that
Yeah,
serves some very particular kinds of bees.
we have violets on the bee. The bee lawn is all native. So
Oh yeah. Oh, I can't wait to see that.
that has violets in it, and it has self-heal, which is, I guess, a prunella, and some other things that we're infusing into the bee lawn. So yeah, it should be pretty.
So Mel,
That's
before you turn off
fantastic.
your screen, let people know on the call that may not be familiar with the Haskins property and the Aspetuck Land Trust Project, just a little bit about, you know, what it is that.
Sure. So the Haskins Preserve, which is in Westport on Greenacre Lane, is it was an old area where there had been an estate. So the house was there, which is not there any longer, and there's a gravel courtyard, and so we thought that it was a wonderful place to do a demonstration site for native plants, and not only just a demonstration site, but multiple sites of different ecosystems. So we're going to have the bee lawn, the meadow, a wetland native garden, a ecotone transition, which goes from the meadow to the woods. And then we are having a formal courtyard, which is going to be made up of all of our ecotype perennial plants. So it's 20,000 square feet of native plants, and of course the bee island lawn. And we are working, it's not only just going to be another pretty face out there in the garden world, it's a research location for pollinators. So we're working with a bee ecologist from Massachusetts and a landscape architect from Massachusetts, and they have already done a baseline study there of what pollinators, what bees exist. And this spring we're planting thousands of natives. And then over the next 3 years, the bee ecologist is going to keep coming back and testing to see what species actually show up. So this way we can prove that when you plant native plants, you improve biodiversity. So Haskins Preserve is a research center, and it's a demonstration garden. So, you know, if you go to our website as we go do planting and research, we're going to just keep loading all that information on the website. And I also encourage you to come by and visit Haskins sometime, maybe later this summer and the fall.
Just an incredible project. Thank you so much. And so Edwina, coming back to some of the questions that are coming up through your lecture, questions about home mulch mowers. Any suggestions for a particular type of home mulch mower?
No, because electric.
There we go.
Because there's so many options. Last year I bought one. It's the Toro, I think, because it was the highest rated, but it's really small because I have a tiny amount of lawn, as you know, I have to, but it doesn't run for very long. It gets like maybe an hour and a half out of a charge. And so it probably wouldn't be very good for someone who had more lawn, but it's kind of nice in that, like, mowing gets really boring after about an hour and a half. So you can stop while it charges and do something else. It works really well. I can say that about it, but I think depending, I would just say go online. There are so many more coming out in the world now, just like electric cars, that just check with, look at the online ratings.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. So, what was the name of the composter that takes the meat, fish, and dairy? Someone's commenting that's usually a no-no for a home compost pile, isn't it? And
Yeah.
so people were curious about what the name of that particular composter was.
It's called Green Johanna, or I guess you could say Johanna, maybe. It's from Sweden, but they just go to the Green Johanna USA and the USA distributor. Remember, do not get, they have two products. One's called a green comb, and that's a biodigester, and it goes in the ground and it does not make compost, but if you have a small space and you want to recycle all of your kitchen scraps and you don't have any need for compost, you can get the green comb. But if you want to recycle and compost all of your kitchen scraps, you get Green Johanna. I'm going to get a second one because I'd like to finish, you know, to let this one go full cycle and let it finish. And then, because this, otherwise you're pulling it out the bottom, and I don't feel that works as well as letting one get done while you're adding to the other. The reason that people don't usually, why the meat, fish and dairy are no-nos is partly because of rats and partly because of pathogens. But these little composters really heat up, and the rats can't get in. So I would say, as far as the pathogen issue goes, that obviously you're not going to have that much in your compost heap in there. But if once it cooks down, that's why I want my one to sit there for a while. But I'm working on some stuff with the Rodale Institute. Their composting operation puts entire dead animals, because if they call it, I forget, they have a very kind word for it, like their livestock losses, I think they are. They all go in the compost heap. Because it's amazing, and it's tested constantly, and so there is nothing wasted. There is just not a thing wasted. Nothing leaves their property.
It's remarkable. So another question, can natural habitats survive a voracious deer population?
No. The deer are seriously a problem. I don't know about up there, but I am just fencing in another part of my property because the deer ate everything. And I'm worried about a lot of our native forbs because they're no longer in the meadows. My own meadow, when it first came up naturally, was filled with butterfly weed and all kinds of wonderful things. The deer have taken it all out. All of our lady slippers, all of our wonderful woodland ephemerals gone. And this is not sustainable. And this is not like, I'm just hoping somebody deals with it. I don't care how. It's gonna have to get resolved somehow, because there's no recruitment. Recruitment is the next stage of a forest. You know, a forest has to replenish itself. There are no young trees in the forest, so that's a long time before that's going to be a problem. But there's no understory either. There's no place for ground nesting birds to live. So that means there are no foxes. The whole ecosystem is just completely out of balance because of deer, and it's not good for the deer either. The Carey Institute, you know about them, right? In Millbrook, they're studying this.
Thank you. And so people were, someone else had a question about what do you recommend for a natural defense against mosquitoes in our yard?
One thing, it depends on a few things. It depends on where you live. So a lot of people live in places where homes really never actually should have been built. So that, you know, the mosquito habitat is really the habitat they're living in. And so in that case, you can really only, you know, put on a lot of, well, be very careful about your watering. I mean, let your landscape be dry a lot. And then just the other part is where repellents and use, I burn a lot of incense if I'm outdoors in the evening, and it actually works. And it doesn't really matter what it is, citronella, it doesn't, sandalwood, it's just actually the smoke.
And a follow-up
But
question.
the mechanical things don't work, so don't get them. They kill a lot of bycatch.
And a similar question about ticks and tick control.
Ticks are part of the deer, like that whole out of whack problem. The Carey Institute, which is doing this research, they are showing absolutely no proof that spraying your yard reduces the incidence of Lyme disease. You can, for momentary knockbacks of the tick population, but not sufficient. And there is no tick specific control at this point. So if you're spraying for ticks, you're killing everything equally. So that's a problem, and it's a decision you have to make. So one way is to fence your place against the deer, so that'll reduce them to some extent. But the real thing is you spray yourself and check yourself. Those are the two things that our local tick-borne disease center recommends. Spray yourself, check yourself. And it's not a happy response, but it's the best we have right now. And once again, careful with your watering. Ticks do not live in dry places.
So people were turning to the question about weeding a garden. Is it necessary?
Well, yeah, I like weeding, but it depends on the garden. But see, like I've done, when, like I said, when you get, if you're lucky to get a meadow really in pretty good shape, and you don't have local invasives, the weeding can be really minimum. I'm having problem in meadows now with miscanthus. I forget what is called, maidenhair grass or something like that, because they're starting to escape badly into the wild, and they're really hard to get rid of, and they're taking over meadows. So that's the one thing I'm digging out of meadows right now, or trying to manage. The other thing is mumweed or mugwort is another big thing that in a natural garden, if you let it get a foothold, it's just very, very difficult to get rid of. But if you can get your gardens packed, really packed with the plants you want, and use a combination of aggressive and non-aggressive. So then what you're weeding is you're basically pulling back your desired aggressive plants from your desired, maybe less aggressive plants.
And so, in speaking about the meadow, people had questions about how to prepare a site that has all kinds of invasives to turn it into a meadow.
Yeah, without chemicals, and that depending on the plants, it can be difficult. But actually, one of the best ways is to turn it into lawn for a while and just mow it like crazy. Just keep mowing it and mowing it. I mean, but not real lawn. You just mow it and mow it really short. And you only have to mow it. I think your website has a really good management, isn't it? Yours, Mel, that has that that chart for when to cut invasives to do the maximum harm? Or
Yeah.
Did I see? Yeah.
We have an invasive plant that was developed by the Connecticut Invasive Plant Working Group, and yeah, it has a chart on it of when to mow what invasives, and it's great. So I can direct people to that.
Because it's a really good chart, because that's what you want to do, is just do the maximum insult to plants at the time when they want to grow or want to produce seed. Like, never let them go to seed. That's number one. And number two is to cut them back, not because, cutting back plants often, that makes them grow better. So that's not the time you want to cut an invasive back when you're going to increase its root system or something. So that little chart could be really good, but repeated mowing is really a good way. You can solarize if it's not too huge a space, which is either with black or clear plastic. I use vinegar on some things. You can use a sod cutter and just strip the top off of it. One thing meadows do not need is rich soil. In fact, that's the last thing you want in a meadow. A rich, really overly rich soil just brings more weeds, and you never want to water a meadow. So by just really starving it and letting it get dry, and the weeds will be less aggressive. But you have to, and I generally, if a place is filled with a lot of invasives when you start, you want to wait a few years and see what comes up before you start putting precious plants in there.
And so the question of when do you cut a meadow? Once you've established a meadow, what time of year do you cut the meadow?
I wait until there's green showing. So there, if you have new growth at maybe an inch or two, that's when I cut it. But that requires that you cut it at least 6 to 8 inches high, so that you're not scalping, because a lot of the perennials, and particularly the warm season grasses that are really the core components of our meadows and our ecozones, they're clump formers. So as they mature, they get a very sort of a high rounded dome. You don't really want to go whacking away at that. And so you have to be sure to mow above it. The other reason you want to mow high is so you're not chopping up turtles and all the things that are still living in the litter on the ground, which could be late hatching insects. And then cutting high leaves the stems up. So those open stems are where a lot of our native bees lay their eggs.
So Edwina, this is a great question that you were talking about before. Someone was asking, what do you do when you try to be pesticide, herbicide free and your neighbors just insist on the perfect green lawn? I've tried to educate my wild yard with my wild yard, and it's just a no-go with them. What thoughts do you have about communicating with your neighbors?
It's not necessarily a no-go, but it's a slow go, because I once learned this early thing that a no is just a very slow yes. And so, but one of the things that we've been trying to do, which is, and it's really, you're the example of that, is that bringing people together over a larger issue. And so that by not focusing on a single individual, but maybe bringing the entire neighborhood together, and maybe the entire neighborhood engages around the idea of being part of a pollinator pathway, or they engage around the idea of something that is, and maybe it's even more than one thing. So you don't feel like you're singling any one thing out, but then it becomes neighbor watching neighbor. But it's also neighbor helping neighbor, but it's not going to happen overnight. But it's really, if you single out one person to try to sell your preference to, it is less likely to be successful.
Thank you for that. So we have a question from someone who really loves their mature trees, and they were looking for any recommendations for native plant areas that have become very shady from their mature trees. And they say, boy, I am loaded with scythe ferns. So what can I do?
Well, it's a little hard for me to say, not being there in that. So I would say, like, you have a native plant sale, right? Or the pollinator pathway does. So that would probably be because you'd want to buy local eco type plants. There are wonderful things that are now starting to become available that are pretty aggressive. Some of the chrysogonums, what is that called? Green and gold. And and prunella, mahania. These are ground covers that do pretty well in shade. The other place that I've been relying on lately is Garden in the Woods, the Native Plant Trust. Their new head of horticulture is a guy named Uli Lorimer, and he ran the Native Plant Garden at Brooklyn Botanic. And he's just amazing. And they grow the plants they sell, they collect the seed locally. And you have to go there to buy stuff. They don't ship, but they will put together a mixed deep plug flat for you too. And their plants are terrific, and their advice is amazing.
If I could just jump in, I would encourage everybody to go to our website because as Edwina mentioned, our native plant sale is now open. And this year we have 37 species of native ecotype plants, which explain what ecotype is. These are plants that are supposed to be in this area. They've been in this area for thousands of years. We don't use them anymore. And we've had great botanists at Connecticut NOFA going out and collecting the seeds. And then our friends at Planter's Choice, Daryl, has been propagating them. So we have 37 species, and all the descriptions and the planting plans are on our website. So pickup for them is in May, but you can order now. We'll keep it open throughout the month of March.
And you have sample garden packs, right?
Yeah,
like
exactly.
We do. For certain situations, because one thing about having big old shady trees, I really appreciate your asking, because it's just crazy to try to grow lawn under a tree. You know, anybody who wants to grow plants under trees is doing the right thing for sure.
And what I so appreciate about what you're saying, Edwina and Mel, about the plant sale is that what Aspetuck Land Trust has done is really put together planting groupings, hedgerows, and you can really jump on the Aspetuck site on the plant sale, and the information about what shade plants are available right there, and also ideas for drop-in gardens. So thank you so much, Mel, for putting that together for everyone. So it makes it simple. It really does. Aspetuck Land Trust has made it very, very simple to be a part of this. Another question here about the brush piles. Can invasive plant brush be a part of those, or should they be disposed of separately?
Well, that's, I have something I call my sucio pile. Sucio means dirty in Spanish. And so I realized one day when they're like, oh, sort of putting all of my invasive plant stuff in a thing to take it to the landfill. And I thought, wait a minute, they have a composting program. So that means if their compost doesn't get hot, my invasive plants are going to be spread all over all over town. That's not very responsible. So I just put them all into a separate compost heap that I just sort of don't use much. I don't turn it, but I just let it, what comes up in it come up, and then keep weeding it. And after it, and then I start a new pile, and after that one just doesn't sprout anything bad anymore, I figure I can use it in limited ways. But as long as, and the thing is, it depends on what the invasive plant is and at what stage you have collected it. So obviously if it has seed, you're going to want to put it out of the way. I mean, you can burn it, but I choose that. And if you have a really hot compost, but hardly anybody does. The other thing is if it's one that propagates from root bits, then you certainly don't want, you can't chop it up and use that in a twig pile. But if it's a part of an invasive plant that has no chance of replicating, then sure, it's a good thing to do with them. Like the branches of a Norway maple.
So boy, we have a lot of questions here, and want to do my best to reach both of you so that you can answer some of this. Another one coming up: how do you incorporate edible fruits, berries, and vegetables in your designs? And what sort of devices do you use to protect edible plants from hungry animals?
Well, is the tall bush blueberry native there where you are? Because
yeah,
it's
high bush and low bush.
Yeah, it's a really core, plant here, and but the birds eat them, and you'll never get a blueberry if you don't put them in a cage here. So anyone who wants a good blueberry crop, we do that. The raspberries don't seem to be much of a problem, and it all depends on the style of your garden that you want. Because if you're talking once again, there's this sort of this separate thing. If you want to do food for you versus food for everything else. And you could sort of share a little bit, but if you had your heart set on a particular amount of fruit for a particular something you wanted to do, then you're probably going to need to somehow cage it or put it in a garden where you're keeping it's fenced off. But you can grow raspberries with a meadow. It's harder to maintain though, because it's harder to keep the grasses out. So in most cases for plants that I think you want to grow for productivity, either you grow them in a specific bed that is weeded and that is mulched, or you put them out in the landscape and expect to get maybe a quarter or less of the productivity of that plant. Except for trees. Trees do well, obviously. You can put them anywhere.
Okay.
There's a whole new world of perennial edibles now. Do you know Jim Glover? He's a grower on the North Fork here. And he's really made a big investment in growing natives. And now he started this whole perennial edibles section. And he's promoting mixing plants. Some of them are I haven't tried. Most of them I've never even heard of. Just kind of, it's really fun. So I'm hoping to get some this year.
Thank you for that. Another person had a question about irrigation, and what they asked is, what's the magic equation for irrigation? How many days apart? How long to water? And this is only for their front lawn because they're planning on getting rid of the grass in the back.
Well, there is no equation because every property is different. Every year is different. Soils are different, sun, there's shade, and then there's seasonal changes. So really what I recommend is you get a moisture meter, and there's one that has a long stem, like this long, and you water when it's dry, 5 or 6 inches down, and you don't water. And you water until it then is wet, 5 or 6 inches down. And that does break down to, if you need a sort of rule of thumb, don't start watering until you leave footprints in your lawn, which means your lawn grass is wilting, which is usually sometime in June. And we'll usually get one hot spell, so you'll water once through that. And then you wait until it gets hotter and drier. When it is midsummer, super hot and dry, you'll water once a week. And in really bad times when it hasn't rained at all, you might have to step it up to twice a week. If your place gets super dry, you might want to water in 2 sections so that the water's not running off. So you water for 45 minutes to an hour one day, and you do the same the next day to make sure you're watering deep enough. And then you don't have to water again for a week. And if you have plants that are wilting all the time, like maybe a big leafed hydrangea, the chances are the plant's in the wrong place because they really shouldn't be in full sun. And so, and some plants can wilt on a regular basis, and it actually doesn't. That's just the way they are. And people are all worried about watering them constantly. But it's not all that good for them because they end up having shallow roots and they're not particularly resilient. But the thing is, don't start watering until the ground is truly dry, because in the spring people start watering and the ground is wet. So the roots have just no incentive to get robust. They're not looking for water. They're getting more than they can handle. They end up on the surface. It's a plant replaces 1/3 of its roots every year. So if those new roots are all on the surface, they're going to be very, very susceptible roots.
So Edwina, we had a few questions on specific practices for removing some of the worst invasive plants, mugwort being one of them, without chemicals.
Yes, mugwort is definitely one of them. So what it depends on the extent of this mugwort patch, but the main thing with mugwort is just mowing it. So and what I've done for some of mine, which has worked pretty well, but you have to be able to accept the fact that you're going to have a section of your garden that looks really bad for a year, which is I cover it with cardboard, like layers and layers of cardboard, and put brush on top of it, and just and wet it from time to time to make it really soggy and really heavy, and it just rots the mugwort. But it doesn't look great. You could build a pretty pile maybe with your brush, but or you can just weight it down with rocks. But that's the best, and it's completely free because you've got all those cardboard boxes coming in now, and it works, but it'll try to sneak out around the sides, you know. So and I'm sure I won't. It doesn't get every little bit. So then after that, you really have to be on the watch to pull it out before, or cut it repeatedly, and just never let it get a toe. So much of the mugwort that has come into American home landscapes comes from nursery plants. A lot of the trees that are grown, because nurserymen have a tremendous mugwort problem, and a lot comes in on a tree. So really be on the lookout when you buy a tree to make sure that if there's any mugwort, I'll basically bare root the plant to get every tiny bit of mugwort root out before it goes in the ground.
Thank you. And so there was another question about meadows. Someone was mentioning that they have a meadow, which is about 100 foot by 100 foot, that they put in last spring. Do they need to mow it every year, or can they just leave it?
Well, depending on how they put it in, but it pretty much always a new meadow needs to be cut, because it isn't fully knitted in yet, and there's a good chance that there are things coming in that you don't want, and it also beefs it up. So yeah, you have to cut it. In the old days, you know, they were burned. A meadow is actually a human interference ecosystem. Meadows do not occur naturally. The only ones that are the sand plain grasslands occurred naturally, and the Great Plains occurred naturally. But meadows have always been a very transitory thing that maybe there's a clearing in the woods or a fire. They'll be there for a flash, but then they're quickly replaced. So if you're thinking of meadow as a permanent garden situation, you are going to have to take an active role. There's no question about it.
So there's another question around soil and how to feed the soil. This specific question deals with the question of how to eliminate old pesticides and make it more rich and healthy. How do they get rid of crabgrass naturally? So hitting you with the two questions there.
So pesticides do not last in the soil forever. So that unless you're living on a contaminated site, which hopefully you are not, you know, and that would be something else like old dry cleaning chemicals, or if there was agricultural, some kind of agricultural work that was done there that like had Temic or one of the really nasty fungicides. That's a whole different cleanup system. But typically, if it's just that you had a previous owner or something that used a lot of landscape chemicals, they will disappear over time. The way to feed your soil is to actually let it leave clippings, leave leaves, put compost down, and all of those things actually mycorrhiza, and the soil biome is showing to be actually pretty good at consuming chemicals and deactivating them. And in terms of the crabgrass question, crabgrass is an opportunistic plant. It's an annual, and it will only grow where the conditions are right for it. So a new lawn or a patchy lawn is an invitation for crabgrass because it needs full sun, it needs water, and it needs an open space. So that if your lawn is really thick, crabgrass is not getting in there. You're not giving it an opportunity of maybe very small amounts, but wherever your lawn is stressed, the crabgrass moves in. So the key is, if your lawn is new, then just keep overseeding in the fall and maybe a little in the spring until the crabgrass is crowded out. If there are areas where the crabgrass or the real grass can never outcompete the crabgrass, then you have a problem. There's a problem there, that the grass is not growing well enough to outcompete the crabgrass. So what you got to do is dig around, dig it up, put in some good soil, or figure out what's wrong with that spot. One thing that could be wrong with that spot is that it's adjacent to a patio or some other stone. That means the soil is hot, and lawn grass does not like to have hot roots, and the crabgrass is way more tolerant. Crabgrass is a warm season grass, but it's an annual. So if you can crowd it out and you can keep it from going to seed and replace that space, but as soon as you start putting down pre-emergence or putting down anything or removing the crabgrass, you're making a new crabgrass bed. So you've got to jump in there at the time that is prime for turf grass, which is the fall, and get it filled, get it grown in. And it takes a few years if you don't, and it takes, even if you're using chemicals. In fact, I think if you're using chemicals, you never get there, because you keep recreating crabgrass ideal conditions.
Thank you for that. So 3 more questions, and then we will move toward Mel to wrap this up. Any suggestions to stop spider mites is one of the questions we have here tonight.
Generally, spider mites are get a foothold on a plant that's stressed. So it could be, and the most common conditions for plant stress in the landscape is it's the wrong plant in the wrong place. That the plant is getting more sun than it can handle, its roots aren't in the right kind of soil. It's usually a plant that would want, if you're talking like dwarf Alberta spruces, they particularly are prone to spider mites. My feeling is, if you have a constant spider mite problem with your dwarf Alberta spruce, compost it. And because they're just not generally that happy in this environment if they're in your landscape continually getting a spider mite problem. There are people who I know, there's a guy I know who says he is actually doing, finding ways that he can change the microbiome of the soil, which makes the plants more resilient to spider mites. Being a native plant person, I suggest that maybe you replace that spider mitey plant with something that doesn't attract spider mites. But by and large, you're going to be better off if the plant is, if you determine why this plant is stressed. And then the other way you can get rid of spider mite is you just keep hitting it with water. The best is water, actually, hard blasts, constant hard blasts of water that you just keep knocking them off. But you have to do it a lot, and depending on the plant, getting every one of them is going to be difficult. But because the only other thing you can do is use systemics, and a systemic is a plant that poisons the entire plant. It's a chemical that you put in the soil, moves up through the plant, so every single part of the plant is poison to anything that tries to eat it, because spider mites are sucking insects, and systemics are just they're really high on the bad chemical list. Because any good insect that goes in there, and that like that's what neonics are, the neonicotinoids, which are blamed for a lot of bee die-offs, are systemics.
Thank you. So another question, where is Jim Glover on the North Fork? Would love to get the address.
Well, I realized that I might have made a mistake there. He's wholesale only.
Ah.
So if you're not in the business, you can't buy from him, but you can certainly ask your local garden center to buy from him. And let me just and why not? Get more garden centers to offer more native plants, because it's the thing of the future. You see if I can find him. But first of all, buy out Aspetuck's sale and shop. I'll bet we have a native plant sale here on Long Island, and the one problem with it is they sell out. Like, you've got to be really fast.
So we have one more question.
But I'm just looking up Jim Glover.
Yeah, sounds good.
Glover perennials. Oh, I don't have there, but just look up Glover perennials, and it'll probably come up.
Thanks so much. So we're rounding out the evening with one more question. Someone was saying, I burn brush and spread the ashes on the lawn. Do you think it's an okay practice?
That's a hard one. We're not allowed to burn anymore. Most communities don't allow burning just because it does, it's not really the best for the carbon cycle. Ashes are okay. There's nothing magic about ashes for the landscape. I think if you can chip them, if you can chip stuff and then compost it, that's a better way to put your excess plant material back in the ground.
Terrific. Someone just popped up something, gloverperennials.com. I want to thank everybody for their engagement and their amazing questions. We're reminded too that by Connecticut NOFA that ecotypes, to learn more about ecotypes, visit www.connecticutnofa.org/ecotype project. And a lot of thank yous here, Edwina. Inspiration, you've been providing inspiration for so many who are with us today on the call, and a lot of thank yous. So passing it over to Mel to round us out with evening today.
All right. Well, I just have one question. So Edwina, are you available to answer questions for people if they go to your website?
Mm-hmm. That's what Perfect Earth does.
Okay.
And so, yeah, you can write to me, Edwina at perfectearthproject.org. And I will try to get back to you as fast as I can.
Okay, that's great. I mean, there were some chat questions that were local questions. I can go through and answer them individually for people online. But I just wanted to thank Edwina so much for this wonderful lecture, to have her expertise and her passion for environmentally friendly landscape design and toxin-free landscapes is just all the rage right now, and you were doing it before it was popular. So we're very honored to have you with us tonight. And I encourage people again to just go to Edwina's site. We'll probably have her back again to speak to us about 2/3 for the birds, because that's really exciting. And in the meantime, folks, if you can go to the Aspetuck Land Trust website and check out our plant sale, become members, and you can get lists of upcoming events and other speakers, and become a Green Corridor partner. And get this mailbox sign. We're asking people to do those 3 things: no pesticides, rethink your lawn, and plant native plants, which, by the way, is also what the Pollinator Pathway team is asking. So we want to stay consistent in what we're asking people to do. So if you have this sign on your mailbox along with the Pollinator Pathway sign, you are a super biodiversity champion, and we appreciate that. So again, thank you everybody. Thank you to Mo Green for sponsoring tonight, and thank you to Jean for doing an amazing job as our host. So good night, and spring is right around the corner, so make sure you have a toxin-free landscape this year in 2021. This is what we need. So thanks everybody, and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye.